Welcome to Pick Yourself Up. I'm Asagid Haftold, your host. Today in our studio we have Arnold Sanao. He is an expert. He is the guru of getting along. Arnold, thank you very much
Thanks
for coming.
having
I know
me.
how much crazy busy you are, but you're here to make conversation with me about getting along.
I appreciate it. It's so great to be here.
Let's start by asking you, what's getting along?
Well, let's get right to the point on that one.
Yeah.
And people always say, what does it take to get along? And there's a lot of things that go with it. But the real key there is, there's an old saying, understand others first before having them understand you. And if you want to get along, the point of that is you need to communicate in the ingredients that others find is important and not just what you find is important. So there's a number of things that go with that. And you know, another one I always like to say too is we've all heard that saying, walk a mile in my shoes to really understand somebody. But I like to take it a step further and say, before you walk a mile in my shoes, you need to take off yours first. And to give you an example of that, I know people jump to conclusions sometimes, but you know, the National Football League, they had a controversy where people were kneeling at the games. And people would come in one way, so that's terrible, that's good, that's terrible, that's good, but they need to understand, they haven't lived, they haven't been in the place of those people kneeling. So the question is, why are they kneeling in the first place? And the more you understand where other people are coming from, that's the first step to really trying to get along with others when you really boil it down to it. Because the only person you can really change is yourself. In that case.
Because you don't have a lot of control about the other person. If you have control and if you are in charge of yourself, I think you can be able to get along with other people.
Exactly, and it also depends on your attitude and how you see things, because you know, we all see things, we all have bias, for example,
Yes.
and when people see things in different ways, it affects the way that you get along too. So, and a good example of this, I had a woman I was coaching, because one of the things I do is I coach people on how to get along, and I was working with the president of a company, and a vendor came in to talk with the president of the company to sell something, and he was smooth, he had the right price, he had the right product, he was really good. But when he came in, talking about biased in a sense, he came in, he had everything they wanted, but when he came in, here's the woman, she's the president of the company, and she had two men who worked for her. And so one man was here, one man was sitting on the side of her, and the guy comes in to do a sales pitch, but guess who he looks at the whole time? He looks at the men and not the woman in charge. And, you know, and he didn't probably even realize that. And she said, thank you very much. And he left. But later on, she said, I don't want to work with anybody from that company ever again. And the point of this is, you know, there's an old saying, everything being equal, people deal with what? They deal with people they like and they trust. We all know that.
Yeah.
But here's the flip side of that. Everything unequal, they still deal with people they like and they trust. So for example, you know,
right.
and she went to actually somebody else, paid them more because she didn't want to work with that person. And it's like interesting when people hire people now too, the thing they're thinking about. So if you're looking to hire me, for example, you're saying, okay, do I want to work with this guy for the next 5 years or not? I mean, It all goes back to like and trust, and do you have the connection and the rapport? It's stuff you talk about too in that area. Yeah.
By the way, people always challenge me when I tell them that your success, the lion's share of your success is dependent on your softer skills, which requires, you know, to get along, you need to have softer skills. People say, no, they even give me some examples. What if somebody doesn't have the know-how, the technical skills? I tell them that if all things are equal, people prefer to pick the one who has the softer skills. But you told me that even when things are not even equal, they still prefer to pick the one who has the getting along skills.
And it goes back, there was a Harvard and Stanford study a while ago that said that only 15% of your success in your career, or your job, or getting is going to be due to your technical skills. So the technical skills, you know, either competency at your job, and that's in relation to building cooperation and rapport and relationships and connections, and 85% will be due to your communication, your emotional intelligence, and your ability to get along when you really boil it down to it. So it goes back to, and when people say the soft skills and they say, well, how do you do that? And this, people can learn. I mean, I do about 100 plus workshops and presentations a year to companies all over the country and overseas on how to get along better, to build with leaders and teams, to get along better, to build rapport and relationships and connect with others. And if they work on it, they can actually do it. There was interesting too, because there was a book that came out a while ago called One Word. And the whole premise of this was to focus on one thing that you can do better for he said a year. I can't go that long, but I would say for like 6 months. And so, for example, last year my word was be present, which means so when I'm talking to you, I don't look at anybody else. I focus on that person. But every day I wrote on in my iPhone, it said, be present, be present. You reminded myself. And then on the wall, it said, be present, be present. And if you do one thing at a time, you get better. And so my suggestion to people is if they want to build better, get along better, which is building the better soft skills that you talk about, they need to, I would say, focus on one word that you can work on for the year. So it could be grateful, be more grateful, appreciate people. But focus on that and do that for 6 months. He says a year. I'll say 6 months. But every day look at it. And if you focus on one thing, guess what? It becomes a habit, and you actually get better in that area. So it's something.
I like the example you gave us earlier about that guy. You mentioned that he might not even be aware.
Right.
So which means people might have some blind spots. They may not even know that they have issues to get along with others.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we all have blind spots,
Yeah.
I think. And the other part of that is sometimes, even though this is common sense, and I think intellectually people know this stuff, it's not that you do it. Yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, I've been doing this, I've done over 2,500 workshops and training programs, and as I said, over 100 a year. And it was interesting because just a few months ago, I was talking to there was an 8-year-old kid there. And he said, and I was just talking to him, and he just looked at me and says, Mr. Sano, you should look at me when you speak. And I'm thinking, that's like basic, basic getting along, basic connection skills. But we tend to forget sometimes. We tend to not, even though we write about it, we talk about it, we see it, people need to keep focusing on it and over and over. And it's interesting because when I do workshops, my biggest hope there is that hopefully I'm just reminding these people to just do these things. And a lot of it goes back to body language and tone, and when you talk about the soft skills in that area. And just for your, I know we might have talked about this last time, but I always like to have a little acronym called SOFTEN, SOFTEN, how to soften your image to make yourself more approachable and likable and trustworthy. And just to give you a quick thing on that, the S would be smile.
Okay. To smile.
Smile, yeah. Although I tell people smile only when appropriate.
Yes.
Yeah,
don't fake it.
Don't fake it. Don't smile make sure you smile. And if you don't normally smile, don't start doing it all of a sudden either, because people wonder, what are you up to?
Yeah.
The O would be open, and we have a habit sometimes of doing like this. And this doesn't mean, this innocently can mean I'm cold or comfortable, but unfortunately, what do people perceive? They perceive it as, your distance, you don't care, you're aloof.
This is a subconscious thing, even if they're not conscious, they might be unconsciously thinking that you're closed.
Yeah, they're cold, but unconsciously they think you don't like them, and if you ever get in an argument with somebody and you do this and I do this, it's you against me, and that. The F would be forward lean or focus, and I don't mean leaning over when you talk to somebody, but paying attention to them. The T would be territory, not getting into somebody's space. So, for example, in American culture, the ideal distance is about 14 inches to 4 feet. And then the E is eye contact, and that doesn't mean staring at anyone either. Eye contact means, like, in American culture, it's about every 3 to 5 seconds. But don't do this. Don't start timing it.
It's very hard to time.
Stay on the person until you finish the point. And then the N is nod, nodding to show that you're paying attention. So, and the point is, if you don't do those things, you're not as approachable. So, like, if you're not looking at me, I'm saying, why is that guy not? If you look like this, I'm saying, I'm not going to ask him any questions. So it was not approachable, and then people get mixed up where you're coming from too. So it's just they're perceiving you in certain ways, and I think we've always heard that term, perception is reality, which is not really true. Perception is not reality, but my perception, unfortunately, is what? Your reality. So when somebody walks in a room, they make up their mind about you in what? In milliseconds.
Yes.
So you really got to talk your way out of it at that point. Yeah.
That's why first impression is very important. And also, people could be wrong in their perception, but you don't have any control. They just perceive you that way. If they think you're not open to them, if you're not friendly, that's it. It doesn't matter whether inside of you believe that you are friendly and you are engaging with them. So why is getting along that hard? Do you know the very reasons why it's too hard for some people, or maybe for many people?
Well, the reason for getting along for a lot of people is we all came from different backgrounds. We were all raised differently. We all come from different perspectives. We all have different biases. And it's sort of like how Democrats and Republicans get together and then well, how can you see it that way? Well, how can you see it that way? Well, they see it different ways because they were raised differently. They came from different backgrounds. They came from different ways. And then just to give you an example, my in-laws one time, we were driving up to Pennsylvania and for the holidays, and I'd just driven like 3 hours, and my wife and my sister-in-law, they get in a little fight about the politics of things, and my wife says, well, we're leaving. And I said, no, we're not. It's like, and I said, if you guys can't get along, we got it, but they were just seeing it from, they said, how can you see it that way? Well, the reason they don't get along is because they're all coming from they did have different jobs, they had different places to go to, different things to see, and a lot of times it's perception too. It's like we don't realize that the messages that we're giving don't mean different things to different people. So like, for example, if I walk in the morning and you're my boss, and I say, good morning, and you say nothing, and you're my boss, well, I'm thinking, oh, he doesn't like me, am I going to get fired, all this, and so I perceive it as a slight. And a lot of people come to me and they think, well, this guy doesn't like me. I said, well, what do you mean he doesn't like me? Well, he didn't say hi. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that, but then it starts people not talking to each other and not getting along as well.
One of the things that you mentioned about the SOFTEN acronym was about the way we look at people, whether we're making eye contact, whether we have open gestures, and so on and so forth. It differs from culture to culture. In some cultures, for example, people look at you when they talk. In some cultures, they show respect by not looking at your eyes. So what do you advise to people who are trying to get along with people from different cultures?
Yeah, and it's a good point, because we were talking this before the show, and I know you mentioned that, well, this isn't necessarily true in, in Ethiopia or any other country where, or some countries, if you look at somebody, that's an insult, or you get too close, or in American culture, you want to be like, 14 inches, 4 feet away, and in some cultures, you want to be right in their face.
Yeah, hug them and touch them, hold their hands.
And the only way to really learn that is to, because I know when I work with cross-cultural groups, I'll look at all sorts of different, things that you can do in different cultures. And there's a good book called The Do's and Taboos of International Travel. And I would recommend people get that. It's called Do's and Taboos of International Travel. And what it does is it actually shares different, like if you go to Japan, you're going to do it differently. And it has 2 pages on each country. So I always suggest when people go overseas, and I do that myself when I go overseas, because if I do the soften, I'll probably offend everybody. So I need to do something else. So it's a good point you make.
Yeah, I like that. Let's break it here.
Okay.
Our viewers, let's take a quick break and we'll come back soon. Stay tuned.
If I got to go to college, oh my goodness. I just feel like that's my destiny. You get to make like a supernova of skill or talent or whatever it is. My name is Queen, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back. This is Pick Yourself Up. I'm a host. Today we're talking about getting along with Arnold Sanaa. He is an expert in getting along. We've been talking about how to get along, the challenges, and so on. We keep on continuing to talk about getting along. I want to talk about your book for our viewers. This is your book. It's called Get Along with Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere. 8 Keys to Creating Enduring Connections. Tell me about the core message of the book.
Well, the core message of the book is everybody wants to belong. I mean, we really do want to connect. people want to connect. So the thing, I wrote this book when we actually wrote the book, was to use as a guide. Not that you have to read all the way through it, but there were certain things in there like communication crushers. What are the things that get in the way of you being not as effective with others people? So it could be like sarcasm to saying to people.
Yeah.
It could be not listening to people. It could be poor eye contact. It could be being a bully, and we have chapters on all those things. So for example, if you're dealing with a bully at work, there's a chapter in there on how to deal with bullies at work. If you're dealing with other situations on getting along better with certain age groups, we have certain things on how to deal with millennials and how to deal with Generation X. And so it was built as a chapter on each different very segments or competencies that you need to be successful at to get along with others.
Among all the competencies that we need to get along, which one do you think is the top one?
Well, one there's a lot of top ones, I would say.
At least maybe the first three top. Or,
well, here's a couple, and I'll say some here. There's an old saying: it's not what's said that's important. That's just important. It's what's also not said, and it's also how it's perceived. So it's not just what's said that's important. It's also what's not said, but how it's perceived in certain areas. So just to give you an example, I was doing a workshop a while ago, a team building workshop, and I had a person in the room who was basically, looking at her phone the whole time, just dozing off, getting tired and all this stuff. And my perception right away was that, I wouldn't hire her. I would never talk to her in my life.
Yeah.
I thought she was a terrible employee, and I had that immediate perception on that. But then I found out later that she had a terminally ill child. Wow. She had to be on the phone during that time, and she didn't sleep all night, so that's going to affect her. But here's the point: it's not what's said, not just said, that's important. It's what's not said. Now, if I'd known that, if somebody told me, because sometimes they tell me this in groups, hey, I was up all night, I might be sleeping. And if I know that, then my whole perception changes, and my whole perception changes about that person. So a big part of when you talk about getting along is it's not just what's said that's important, so what's not said that comes across that makes a difference on that too. Another thing I would say that makes a really difference here too, when we talk about getting along, people want to belong. They want to connect. And I'm a big proponent of being inclusive with people. So when we talk about getting along, let's say we're at a meeting, because I also deal with a lot of companies and with their leadership staff. And it's interesting because I'll observe some of them. And let's say you're the boss, and there's three of us right here, and you're just looking at me the whole time and nobody else. And so what happens is the two other people think, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with this guy? I don't like him. It's all this stuff. And I'm very proponent of you include everybody in the group. I don't care what level they are, who they are, what status they have. Everybody's important. And I always remember too I had an opportunity to meet Bill Clinton a long time ago, and he did something amazing. When he would walk into a room, he'd skip all the people who were real important type people, and he'd go over to the staff and talk to and shake each one's hand. And I thought that was really impressive. He didn't go to the cool people or the ones who had all the money and all that, but he'd go to the staff and get to know them, and you immediately liked him.
You want to hear him.
Yeah, you want to hear him. You liked him, and it was like, wow, he comes up to do, and so you make that impression that goes with it.
What do you advise to, for example, business owners in helping their people, especially if they have immigrants, for example, people from other cultures? What would you advise to those businesses to help their people to get along with people from diverse cultures?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because a number of years ago I did some work with USAID, and we had people from different cultures come over. And my whole purpose was to explain how to work within American culture. And and you'd see groups, because at one time I had people from Mongolia, and I had a 3-day session with them, and it was interesting. Because they just kept writing everything I said, and they showed you the ultimate respect. And it was people from China. I had people from China at one point. Some groups come from China, and to them, the professor or this person talking gets the ultimate respect. Whereas in the United States, that's not true. So they look at okay, he's here, but and they would never question me either. They never ask. I could say stuff about what we're talking about now, and they never disagree. They'd always just listen. and they just assume what you're saying is right. So, but what I tell people from other cultures is, you know, you really need to learn this. So what I did is they all had a get along book, and we went over, okay, in American culture, you know, you need your body language and your tone and the words you use need to be in this system. When you walk into a room, this is how you approach people in these areas. You know, I noticed we talked about hugging before.
Yeah.
And in some countries, hugging is just a natural thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, and here, some places you might get in a lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
So you gotta, and I'm very careful about this because I belong to a group where people hug each other, but I walk into a room and I just wait for the other person to make it first because I don't want to get in trouble or do that. And so, you know, but the culture is to really go in and to explain to them. And in the book, I go into, you know, in American culture, these are all the things you did. So it needs to do.
So at the center of getting along, especially people from other culture, is for you to have room for others from other cultures because they may have their own cultural background, expectations, assumptions, and so on. You don't need to judge them based on your own cultural expectations, assumptions, and also preferences.
So you're saying like not judging. So what I think what you're saying here is that from a perspective. So let's say, you know, I grew up in an American culture. To be careful on how your rule book on how it relates to other people from different cultures.
For example, one of the things that I help immigrants is that they need to understand the American culture and make sure that they adapt to the culture if they want to succeed.
Right. Okay.
For example, when immigrants go to, especially, you know, from my culture and other communal culture. When you go for interview, for example, you may have, you know, people from different cultures. Some may understand you while you're not making eye contact. Some may understand you if you don't have a firm handshake, but their lack of firm handshake or lack of eye contact may be interpreted differently by an American interviewer. They may think that you're not engaged, you're not honest, you don't look like you're happy with the recruiters and so on. So one of the things I tell them that you have to revisit your cultural background and find ways to, you know, really get along with people from other cultures, but you cannot do that if you don't have a room, a positive attitude. If you feel like judging, like, you know, my culture is better than other people's, you don't make the change. You think your culture is better than the same way. You know, if you are an American, if somebody is not shaking hands with you firmly, if not making eye contact, if they don't have open hands, and because, you know, in our culture, for example, when you meet someone, you may show respect, for example, by putting your hands like this, by putting your head down. So if somebody sees somebody having this kind of gestures, they should not judge them based on their own cultural assumptions, perceptions, and so on.
And to take
just giving room, saying that, okay, maybe in their culture it is interpreted differently.
Right.
You come closer, you ask them, you connect with them to learn more about why they do what they do.
And, you know, it goes back to that statement before. It's not just what's said that's important, it's what's not said, and how people perceive you. So if I let you know, wait, here's the way in our culture we do this, then I accept it, and I don't judge it in a certain way too. So it's a point. But I taking it a step further, I know that when I go overseas to different places, I need to adapt to that culture. So there used to be a term called the ugly American, which was they'd go over and they thought, okay, everybody has to adapt to us. And I don't know if they still use that term or not, but people used to come over, okay, this is the way it's done, and they dismiss all the other stuff. But I know from a fact that when I go overseas, I read that book, The Do's and Taboos of International Travel, and I say, okay, if I'm going to Germany, okay, what's the things I should do and shouldn't do? Because you can get so much trouble by following just your culture. But I need to sort of submit myself to that culture instead of the other way around. They don't need to do it to me. So,
yeah, I know.
But
it's a two-way street. You know, getting along, you have to play your part, and also the other person, because you cannot do it by yourself. But always, I believe that the best way to get along is to have that less judgment, more of understanding, more of openness, more of being yourself in that person's shoes. That's gonna help you to get along. Let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
What are the impacts? For example, if somebody thinks that, hey, I get along, I don't need to get along, what would be the impacts of somebody who is neglecting their ability to get along?
Well, you know what? When they think they already are great at this, and that's why I actually called I have a session. I wrote the book called "Get Along with Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere," but my sessions are called "Get Along Better with Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere," which means that I'm trying, because a lot of people's ego or pride gets in the way, and they think they know it all, or they're the greatest in the world, and nobody needs anything else, and those are the ones I'm scared about the most. And and it's interesting because I've had some coaching contracts with people just exactly like that. And I have to tell them, like, yelling at people is wrong. Harassing somebody is wrong. Bullying somebody is wrong. And it's nice because I can go into a company and be the truth to power person, where everybody in the company is afraid to tell this person anything. I don't really care. I mean, I get fired the next day anyway. Yeah. So, but I mean, the point is it's like, somebody has to tell them and be direct with that person and say, here's why, you're not getting along. It's not working as well. And the unfortunate part is people don't want to confront people, especially in a company, because everybody knows each other. They don't want to do it. And although it's helped me get a lot of work, but in that case, I won't complain. But it's something that
we are almost running out of time. So, what are the 3 things that you suggest to our audience that are going to help them to get along better?
Okay. Well, I would sort of repeat a couple things just to summarize a little bit here too. Just remember, it's not what's said that's important. It's what's not said. No, it's not just what's said that's important. It's what's not said that's important. I think I said that right. In that case, and it's how you're perceived. So it's how you perceive things. The other thing, like what you were talking about here, is don't go watch out for your biases and your rule book. I like to call it your rule book, which means these are the values, the beliefs you grew up with. Doesn't apply to everybody else. So how I see the world does not apply to everybody else. So that would be the second thing. And then the other thing is I'd just be careful of how you come across, your body language, tone, the words you use, because they all are going to have effect, and people make up their minds about you immediately like that.
I know you inspire, you educate, and also you coach people. If people want to be coached, mentored, if they want you to help them or their teams, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, if they want to get in touch, they just look up Arnold, A-R-N-O-L-D, Sanow, S-A-N-O-W.com. That's my website. They can also email me at speaker@arnoldsanow.com, just my name again. And I'll tell you what, for the audience here, if anybody wants to call, I'll even give my phone number, 703-869-1881.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay,
I really enjoyed our conversation.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate that you come here to share your expertise about getting along. Dear our viewers, I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Until I see you with another program, have a wonderful time. Thank you very much for watching.